In the ruins of 1946 Hamburg, Clara's mother receives a single photograph of her daughter from an American POW camp. But instead of relief, she drops it in horror, whispering, "What have you done?" The image doesn't show a prisoner in chains, but a woman sitting at a sun-drenched Thanksgiving table, smiling beside the father of a fallen American soldier. As her neighbors brand her a traitor and her own family threatens to disown her, a chilling mystery remains. What forbidden truth did Clara discover in that Indiana kitchen that made her embrace the enemy? And what was the direction she chose that now threatens to destroy what's left of her life at home? November in southern Indiana arrived without negotiation. In Hamburg, in Clara's memory, autumn had been a slow and reluctant process, a long amber diminishment that seemed to argue with winter before conceding to it, the trees giving up their leaves a few at a time over weeks, as though each one required a separate decision. Indiana autumn was not like this. Indiana autumn was administrative. One week there were leaves on the trees along the compound fence. The following week there were not. The wind had come through on a Tuesday night and settled the matter, and the trees stood bare on Wednesday morning against a sky that had decided on gray and would not be reconsidered until April. Clara had watched this happen from Barracks 3. She had been watching the Indiana landscape for 4 months, since July, since the transport had brought her from a processing camp in France to this flat and enormous American interior. And she had come to understand that the landscape operated according to principles different from the ones she had grown up inside of. It did not soften things. It did not negotiate the transitions between states. The summer had been absolute. The autumn had been absolute. The winter coming would be absolute. She found this, against her expectations, clarifying. There was a discipline to it that she respected. She was 33 years old and from Hamburg. She had taught literature and composition to 14-year-olds in a secondary school near the Ulster for 6 years, until the school was requisitioned, and then until the school was damaged, and then until there were not enough students left in the neighborhood to constitute a class worth gathering. After that, she had been redirected through a series of bureaucratic reassignments, too tangled to summarize cleanly, into administrative work, into records management, into a labor ministry office in Bavaria, where the Americans had found her in April with a file of unprocessed forms and the specific expression of a woman who had understood for some time that the thing she was doing was no longer connected to any purpose it had originally served. She had been a prisoner for 7 months now. She had organized the 7 months the way she had organized her classrooms, with attention and structure and the disciplined maintenance of curiosity in the face of conditions that did not naturally produce it. She read everything available in the camp library, in both German and the English she was working to improve. She paid attention to the guards and the administration and the other women and the landscape and the town visible beyond the fence, with the same comprehensive attention she had paid to everything her entire life. The attention of someone who believes that looking carefully is both a moral practice and a practical one, that the world yields its information only to those willing to receive it fully. She had been revising her account steadily for 7 months. She was not finished revising it. Agnes Bremer occupied the bunk above hers. She had done so since July, and in 4 months they had arrived at the specific familiarity that comes not from affinity, but from proximity and duration. The familiarity of knowing each other's sleep patterns, morning habits, the exact weight and texture of each other's silences. Agnes was 44 and from Munich. She was the widow of a Luftwaffe officer killed in the North African campaign in 1942, the mother of 2 sons she had not seen since 1944, and a woman whose belief in the essential correctness of the German cause had not dissolved under the pressure of events, but had transformed under it into something harder and more compressed, like a material subjected to more force than it was designed for, and emerging changed in structure though not in fundamental composition. She did not relitigate the war. She did not argue strategy or defend leadership or engage with the women who spent their evenings reconstructing the decisions that had produced the outcome. She was beyond that. She had moved into a position that was quieter and more absolute. The position of a woman who had been part of something, who knew she had been part of it, and who was not going to apologize for that fact. Because apology would require a reconstruction of the account she had built her life around, that she was not prepared to execute. and would not execute under institutional pressure, or the testimony of newspapers, or the expectations of the people who had won. Clara had stopped expecting her to move from this position. She had developed instead a kind of careful regard for Agnes, the regard one extends to a person whose position cannot be altered from outside, but whose humanity is nonetheless present and accessible in the right conditions. Present in the way she spoke about her sons, in the precision with which she maintained her bunk, in the dark blue wool scarf she had received in a package from a cousin in October, and which she kept folded on the shelf above her pillow, with the attentiveness of someone who understands that warmth is not guaranteed and treats each source of it accordingly. Eva Scholl was 22, and from Thuringia. She had the quality of someone handed an enormous experience too early, who was still in the process of understanding what to do with the size of it. She had been raised in the language of seasons and harvests and the particular small certainties of rural life, and the war had overlaid all of that with beliefs she had absorbed because she had not been given the tools to examine them, not out of stupidity or weakness, but because examination requires a frame of reference outside the system being examined, and the system she had grown up inside had not provided one. She was the kind of person who, once shown a different way of understanding something, would understand it that way and would not go back. Not out of inconstancy, but out of genuine openness. She had never been deeply invested in the original version. She had held it the way you hold something someone places in your hands in a crowd, because there was nowhere else to put it. If you are enjoying this video, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel so you never miss a new video. And now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me where in the world you are watching this from. Clara watched her look at things. The Indiana fields, the American guards, the town beyond the fence, and envied, quietly and with full recognition of the envy, the absence of the analytical overlay. Eva simply looked. The thing was what it was, and she let it be what it was, and moved on to the next thing. Clara's mind had never in her life operated this way, and she was not certain it was capable of learning to. But she recognized its value in Eva with the precise and unresentful clarity of someone who knows their own limitations. Ruth Haas was 37 and from Berlin. She was practical in the specific way that certain losses make people practical, as though the experience of losing something irreplaceable sharpens the attention toward what remains and makes it precious in inverse proportion to its apparent ordinariness. Her husband had been a civil engineer. He had not died in battle. He had been killed on his way to work on a Tuesday morning in March 1944, a Tuesday that had been like other Tuesdays until it was not, killed in a bombing raid that had been aimed at something else and had found him instead, on a Berlin street, walking to an office building he had been walking to for 11 years. She had never found a way to locate this death within any of the categories the war had provided for deaths. It was not sacrifice. It was not heroism. It was not even the casualty of ideology. It was simply the death of a man who had been alive and was now not, produced by a sequence of events so massive and so impersonal that the connection between the cause and her husband's particular Tuesday morning was visible only from a very great altitude, at which altitude he was invisible entirely. This had made her practical. She noticed useful things, which guards were lenient, which kitchen staff would give a second portion, which window in which barracks had a gap at the frame that could be blocked with a folded blanket. She had no strong ideological convictions, and the women who did found this unsettling, because conviction in a person is oddly reassuring even when the conviction is wrong, because it tells you where they stand, and therefore where the ground is. Ruth gave no such assurance, but Clara found her, in the quiet way she found most things, to be one of the more reliably honest people in the compound, and reliability was something she had come to value above most other qualities in the 7 months since France. It was Ruth who first heard about Thanksgiving. She had heard it from Patterson, the orderly who worked in the administration building, a young man from Ohio with a natural inclination toward conversation and enough German to make the inclination useful. He had mentioned it in the context of explaining why unusually large quantities of supplies were being delivered to the mess hall kitchen in the second week of November, that it was a holiday, an American tradition, a day of giving thanks, a day when families gathered to eat together, and that the camp commandant had arranged for the women's compound to receive a proper Thanksgiving meal. More than that, and it was this part that Ruth brought back to the barracks with the slight elevation in her voice she used for genuinely significant information. A local farm family outside of town had volunteered to host a small group of prisoners for the actual day, for the actual meal in their actual home. It was voluntary, no one was required, but the offer stood and names could be submitted to the administration office by Friday. Clara heard this and was quiet for a moment. She finished lacing her boot and sat with her hands in her lap and thought about what it meant. An American family opening their home on their most significant domestic holiday to women who belonged, technically and formally, and in the recent memory of a still-living war, to a country that had spent 6 years trying to destroy them. She could not locate the logic of it. She had been in the compound long enough to have revised certain expectations, had assembled from daily observation a picture of American institutional behavior that differed from the propaganda account in several important respects. But a family was different from an institution. An institution had protocols and directives and the Geneva Convention and the administrative apparatus of a country that had decided to treat its prisoners in a certain way and had organized itself accordingly. A family had only its own willingness. Nothing required this. No convention, no directive, no agreement between governments. A family had looked at the calendar and at the compound 3 miles down the road and had made a decision that the decision-making framework of the war had not prepared for. And Clara sat on her bunk and held this information and felt it do something to the account she had been maintaining that she could not immediately categorize, but that she knew was significant. Agnes said, from the bunk above, without coming down from it, that she would not go. She said it in the flat and final tone of a decision already completed, the tone of a woman who had considered the matter and arrived at her position and was announcing it rather than opening it to discussion. She had no interest in being paraded through an American house for the benefit of their conscience or their curiosity, she said. She was not an exhibit. Whatever they wanted to demonstrate by inviting prisoners to their dinner table, to themselves, to their neighbors, to whatever God they were thanking, she was not willing to be part of the demonstration. Clara said nothing. She understood the position. She understood the real reason beneath the stated one, that Agnes's sense of herself depended on maintaining a particular distance from anything that might complicate it. And a Thanksgiving table in a civilian home in Indiana was precisely the kind of situation that complications arrived from. The warmth, the food, the ordinary domestic life of people who had lost a son and were still standing in it, still operating the farm, still setting the table for guests. These were the things that complicated the positions that needed to not be complicated. Agnes understood this about herself, even if she would not have said so. Eva said immediately that she was going. She said it with the directness she brought to everything, without much preceding deliberation, as though the decision were obvious from the moment the information arrived, as though the more interesting question were not whether to go, but what would happen when they did. Ruth said she would go because the farm would have a proper fire and she was cold. Clara looked at her. Ruth said that was sufficient reason. Clara submitted her own name to Patterson on Thursday morning. She allowed herself only a brief examination of why, because the honest answer was that she was not fully sure and she preferred, when possible, to be sure before she examined her own motives. She was curious. That was the part she could name clearly. She had been watching American life from the careful distance of compound observation for 4 months, watching the town beyond the fence, the guards, the administration, the newspapers in the recreation building, and the distance had begun to feel less like a protection and more like a limitation. She wanted to stand inside the thing she had been watching from outside. She wanted to see whether it was what it appeared to be from a distance, or whether proximity would change it. She submitted her name and went back to work. The night before Thanksgiving, she set aside what she intended to wear: her cleanest uniform jacket, her best pair of wool stockings, which were developing a thin place at the left heel that she had been mending carefully and that would hold for another month if handled correctly, the leather shoes rather than the work boots, the small considerations of presentation that a significant occasion draws out almost involuntarily, that the body insists on even when the mind has not fully committed to the significance of the occasion. Agnes watched her from the bunk above. She had been watching the preparations of the 12 women with the expression Clara had learned to read accurately over 4 months. The expression that appeared to be indifference and was not indifference. That was in fact the sustained effort of a woman paying close attention while maintaining the appearance of not paying attention. It required effort. The effort was visible in its consistency, which was too consistent for the genuine article. Clara folded the jacket and set it on the shelf. Agnes was quiet for a long time. Then, without looking down, she said that Clara should take her scarf. Clara looked up. Agnes was looking at the ceiling. She said it again. The dark blue wool scarf folded on the shelf above her pillow. It was warmer than Clara's. The farm would be cold and Clara's coat collar did not close properly, and the scarf would help. She said all of this with the same compression she brought to everything. The words functional and precise, stripped of any content that could be characterized as sentiment. Clara took the scarf. She said thank you. Agnes said nothing. Clara held the scarf for a moment. It was heavier than it looked. Dense wool, well made. The blue of it dark and serious. She thought about what it cost Agnes to give it, not the scarf itself. The giving, the acknowledgement, however compressed and indirect, that the day Clara was going to might be worth being warm for. The concession, however, contained within practicality and deniability that there was something at the Morrison farm that warranted the good scarf rather than the adequate one. She put it on the shelf beside the jacket. She lay on her bunk and looked at the ceiling and listened to the compound settling into sleep around her. The gravel under the guards' boots on their rounds. The cooling of the wooden barracks as the November night pressed against it. The particular quality of sleeping and not sleeping in a room full of women who were, each in their own way, preparing for the morning. Agnes's breathing above her was not the breathing of sleep. Clara lay in the dark and thought about families and tables and the logic of inviting your enemies to dinner. And she did not try to resolve the question, but simply held it open in the way she had learned to hold questions that were too large for the space before sleep, and that deserved better than the imprecision of exhausted thinking. She held it open. She let the morning come. The bus arrived at 9. It was a standard army vehicle with padded bench seats and windows that could be opened, and the institutional smell of a vehicle used for many purposes by many people over many months. Patterson sat beside the driver with a clipboard and a map. 2 guards took the front and back seats with the efficient neutrality they brought to all escort duties. The neutrality of men who had been told this was not a security situation and who were applying this instruction correctly. The 12 women boarded. Clara sat near the middle beside Eva. Ruth sat across the narrow aisle. Lena, the postal clerk from Stuttgart, sat 2 rows forward with her coat on her lap and her back straight and her eyes on the window in the way of someone managing their uncertainty through the discipline of posture. Several women spoke quietly among themselves in the low register of German that the compound had established as the register for significant occasions, not the ordinary conversational German of daily life, but the reduced, careful German of people who are aware that what they say and how they say it matters more than usual. The gate opened. The bus pulled out onto the road. Clara looked back through the rear window for a moment. The compound fence, the guard towers, the barracks, the bare trees along the perimeter, the gray November sky above it all in its decided and unambiguous gray. It was the first time she had been outside the compound since July. The knowledge of this sat in her chest as a physical sensation she could not immediately name. She turned forward. Indiana opened around them. The landscape through the bus windows was not beautiful in any way that Clara's European education had prepared her for. It was flat and brown and enormous in the specific way that places without vertical interruption are enormous. The harvested cornfields running back from the road in stubbled rows to a horizon that was simply there, simply the end of the visible, with nothing between the bus and the horizon that asked to be looked at in any particular way. The farmhouses set back from their driveways behind screens of bare trees. The occasional cluster of red barns around a central house, the barns large and practical and painted in the American way, maintained with the care of things that were working equipment rather than architecture. The sky filling more of the visual field than European skies were permitted to fill, the accumulated vertical ambitions of European centuries having always interrupted it. Hills and forests and church towers and city buildings, always present above the horizontal, always providing the eye with somewhere else to go. Here there was nowhere else to go but the sky. Clara looked at the sky for a long time. She thought about scale. She thought about what it did to a person to grow up inside a landscape built at this scale. The specific quality of self that it might produce. The relationship to distance and openness, and the absence of enclosure. She thought about Hamburg, the harbor smell and the press of the city, and the way the water was always there but contained within the city's frame, held by the architecture rather than the other way around. She thought about what it meant that a country the size of this one had not yet, by November 1945, exhausted the idea of its own possibility. Eva had her face turned to the window with an expression of uncomplicated interest. Not the analytical attention Clara brought to everything, not Ruth's forward-facing practical orientation. Just looking. The fields, the sky, a red barn, a water tower with a town's name in large black letters. She looked at these things as though they were interesting, which they were, and as though their interest required no further processing. Clara watched her look and felt the familiar quiet envy and let it pass. Ruth was watching the road ahead. She had her hands folded in her lap and her coat buttoned to the collar and the posture of a woman who has completed the decision and is now simply present for the arrival. Clara respected this. Ruth did not waste effort on the intermediate spaces of things. The between of departure and arrival, the waiting between question and answer. She went directly from one to the next and was at rest in both. The Morrison farm appeared after a long curve in the road. It came into view as the curve opened and the landscape widened, and Clara saw it first as a collection of shapes. White house, red barn, several outbuildings, a silo, the organized geometry of working agricultural land extending in every direction from the central buildings. Then as specific things, as the covered porch running the length of the house's front, the smoke from two chimneys rising straight and thin in the still cold air, the bare maple trees lining the gravel driveway in two rows whose upper branches made a complicated and precise pattern against the sky. And on the porch, two figures. A man in his 60s in a plaid jacket, the particular stance of someone whose body had been shaped by outdoor work over decades, upright and still with the stillness of people accustomed to waiting for things that arrived on their own schedule. And beside him, a woman of approximately the same age in a dark coat with a white apron visible beneath it, her hair pinned up, her hands at her sides. They were simply standing there, waiting. Clara looked at them as the bus turned into the driveway and moved slowly up the gravel between the maple trees. She was trying to read the woman's expression from a distance and could not yet, not at this distance, not through the bus window. She could see the posture, the coat and the apron, the pinned hair, the hands at the sides. She could see a woman who had been in a kitchen since before dawn for this specific purpose, and who was now standing on her porch watching the consequence of that purpose arrive in a military bus down her driveway, and whose expression she could not yet read, which made the reading of it, when it came, one of the things Clara was moving toward with an attention that had nothing analytical in it and everything that was simply waiting to know. The bus stopped. The engine cut. In the sudden quiet, Clara heard two things simultaneously. The wind in the maple trees above, the dry whisper of bare branches in cold November air, the particular sound of a season that has completed itself, the sound of structure rather than foliage, of the tree revealed beneath what had covered it, and through the bus's ventilation, from the house, from the kitchen that had been working since 4 in the morning, the smell. It came in without announcement. It did not arrive the way the compound's institutional cooking arrived, with the utilitarian plainness of food prepared in volume for a practical purpose. It arrived the way smells arrive when they belong to a category you had filed in the past tense, when they belong to a room you had locked without intending to lock it and they find the keyhole anyway. It was roasting meat and wood smoke and something sweet and cinnamon warm beneath both of those, and beneath all of it, the older smell of the house itself. Decades of cooking and fire and cleaned wood floors and the specific settled warmth of a place that had been doing its job of sheltering people for a very long time and had become, over that time, the smell of that function. Several women inhaled without being aware of it, the body responding to something the mind had not yet processed. The body recognizing the category before the mind had finished identifying it. Clara felt it move through her and felt where it went, which was not into analysis. It went somewhere older than analysis, somewhere that the teacher's precision and the observer's discipline had not colonized, somewhere that was simply the part of her that had grown up in rooms that smelled like this and had not been in such a room in a very long time. She sat with it for a moment. The door of the bus opened. Harold Morrison stepped forward from the porch. He raised his hand in a greeting that was not a wave. It was something quieter and more deliberate, the gesture of a man welcoming guests who require a particular kind of welcome and who knows the difference between a welcome that performs itself and one that simply is what it is. Clara looked at his face as she stood from her seat. She was looking for the specific things she had been told to expect from American faces looking at German prisoners. The residue of 4 years of newspaper and radio, of war dead and war cost, of the comprehensive reorganization of an ordinary American moral landscape around the fact of an enemy. She did not find it in his face. What she found was the face of a man standing on his porch in November, who was glad that the people he had invited had arrived. She filed this immediately. She filed it as the most significant data point of the morning, more significant than the drive through the Indiana landscape, more significant than the smell from the kitchen. A man's face, unperformed, simply glad. She stepped off the bus onto the gravel and felt the cold come up from the ground through her leather shoes and the dark blue wool of Agnes's scarf against her throat. She stood in the driveway of the Morrison farm and looked at the house. She was ready to know what it was. Harold Morrison shook hands with Lieutenant Carr first. This was protocol, and he observed it without making it feel like protocol. The brief professional exchange of two men establishing the terms of a handoff, Carr explaining the return time and the procedure, Harold nodding and listening with the attentiveness of a man who takes information seriously because information on a farm has consequences and the habit carries over. Then Carr stepped back and Harold turned to the 12 women standing on the gravel. He said in English that Patterson translated in a low voice at Clara's shoulder, that they were welcome here. He said this was their home for the day. He said Dorothy had been in the kitchen since 4 in the morning and would not forgive him if he kept everyone standing outside in the cold. The translation arrived and Clara received it and received also the quality of how it had been said, which Patterson's German could convey the content of but not the full texture. The plainness of it, the absence of ceremony, the way a man who spends his days talking to land and animals and the practical requirements of a working farm speaks when he is extending an invitation, which is directly and without the social elaboration that cities develop, because cities have the time for it. She had heard American English for 7 months through the compound's administrative registers, the English of directives and procedures and institutional announcements, and this was different in the way that a thing used is different from a thing displayed. He meant what he said. It was not performance. Dorothy Morrison stepped forward from where she had been standing 1 pace behind her husband and looked at the 12 women with an expression that Clara could now read clearly at this distance, now that the bus window and the 30 yards of gravel were no longer between them. It was not the expression she had expected. It was not the careful diplomatic neutrality of a woman managing a complicated social decision. It was not the performed warmth of someone demonstrating their own generosity. It was the expression of a woman who had made a decision and was standing in it, who had decided something weeks or months ago, in a kitchen or at a table or in the particular quiet of a farm night when the decisions that shape the day reveal themselves, and who was now at the consequence of that decision and was fully present in it without requiring it to be more than what it was. She said something brief. Patterson translated it as, "Please come in, it's warm inside." Then she turned and held the front door open and waited. The interior of the house arrived as a complete sensory event. This was not a metaphor. It was the literal experience of stepping from the gray November cold of the driveway into something so comprehensively different that the body registered it as arrival rather than entry. Not simply a change of temperature, but a change of dimension, as though the house contained a different order of reality from the one outside it. The warmth first. Not the compound's institutional warmth, generated by a central system, and distributed evenly through the barracks with the impersonal efficiency of a machine performing a function. This warmth had layers. The deep warmth of the walls themselves, which had been absorbing heat from 2 fireplaces and a wood-burning kitchen range since the pre-dawn hours, and had become saturated with it. the warmth of fabrics and wood and the wool rug in the entrance hall, the warmth that accumulated in a house the way meaning accumulates in a life, slowly, through the repetition of the same acts in the same space over many years, until the space itself holds the residue of all that repetition. It received you. Clara stood inside the entrance hall and felt it receive her, and stood for a moment in the receiving without moving forward. The smell came with the warmth inseparable from it. Roasting meat. The long, slow roasting of something large, hours into the process, the fat rendered and the surface caramelized, the smell of it not sharp but deep, the smell of patient heat applied over time. Beneath that, wood smoke from the two fireplaces, the dry, sweet smell of hardwood burning, and above everything, moving through everything, the smell that had come through the bus ventilation but was now present without mediation, something sweet and spiced and warm, cinnamon and roasting fruit, and the particular sweetness of pastry browning in an oven. The accumulated breath of a kitchen that had been producing this smell since before any of them had been awake. Clara identified it and filed it. Then she set the filing aside and simply let it be the smell of this house on this morning. The other women had stopped in the entrance hall. Almost every one of them, without coordination, had come through the door and stopped just inside it. Not because it was grand. It was not grand. It was a narrow hall with a coat rack on one wall loaded with coats of various sizes and weights, evidence of a family rather than a single occupant. A wooden bench beneath the rack, the worn rug in muted colors, a framed photograph on the wall above the bench that Clara noted and would look at more carefully later, a pair of men's work boots beside the door, large and mud-darkened and shaped by decades of the feet that had worn them. And beside the large boots, small ones. A child's boots, red rubber, sized for perhaps a 5-year-old. The small boots produced an effect in the hallway that Clara could feel without being able to name it precisely. Something about scale, the large boots and the small boots side by side. The continuity of a family in an object so ordinary it had not been put away, had simply been left beside the door as though it belonged there, which it did, which was the entire force of the observation. It belonged there. Things belonged in this house. Things had places here, and the places were maintained because the life that had established them was continuing, was ongoing, was present in the small rubber boots left beside the door by a child who would put them on again when they went out. Eva was looking at the boots. She was standing 2 feet inside the door with her coat still buttoned, and her eyes on the small red boots with the expression she brought to everything she looked at directly, which was the expression of looking without the requirement of conclusion. She was simply seeing them, the small boots. She stayed with them for a moment longer than the others might have, and then she looked up and moved into the room. Lena, the postal clerk, had her coat in her arms rather than on her back. Clara noticed this. The coat held rather than worn, the reluctance to fully settle into arrival, the residual uncertainty of someone who has not yet decided that this place is safe enough to put the coat down. It was a small thing. It was also an accurate thing. The coat as a kind of portable compound, something to hold while the holding was still necessary. She would put it down eventually. Dorothy led them through the hall and into the main room. It opened to the right and was large in the farmhouse way, which was the largeness of a room built for a family's full life rather than for any single function. A room where things happened that needed space, where children grew up and meals were extended into evenings, and the farm's business was occasionally conducted at the same table where everything else was conducted. The fireplace was at one end. It was burning with a fire that had been built with the deliberateness of a fire intended to last the day. Not the rushed ignition of a fire started quickly for warmth, but the structured burning of logs placed with knowledge of how they would fall and feed each other over hours. A fire that a person had thought about before lighting it. The warmth from it extended into the room in a radius that Clara could feel on her face from the doorway. She moved toward it with the same instinctive directness that several of the others showed, the body navigating toward warmth without requiring instruction. Chairs and a sofa were arranged near the fire. A braided rug in muted reds and browns covered most of the floor between the furniture and the hearth. The windows on 2 walls showed the Indiana fields outside, the flat brown November landscape under the gray sky, and the contrast between that gray outside and the warm amber of the fire inside was so complete that the windows looked less like windows than like paintings of a different world, framed and hung for contemplation. At the far end of the room, a long table. Clara looked at it for only a moment before looking away. Not because it was not worth looking at, because it was worth more than a passing glance, and she did not want to spend it on a passing glance. She would come to it properly. She registered it as a long table with a white cloth and places set along both sides and something at the center that she did not identify before she looked away, and she let this incomplete image rest in her peripheral awareness while she attended to the room. Robert Morrison was near the far window. He was perhaps 30, tall like his father, with the outdoor weathered quality of a man who had spent his life on this land, except for the years that the war had taken him away from it and returned him from in August. With a shrapnel scar along his left forearm and a quietness, his mother moved around carefully, the way you move around something still finding its way back to its original shape. He had a cup of coffee in his hand and he nodded to the group when they entered. A brief, genuine nod. The acknowledgement of a man who has decided to be present for this day without making a production of the decision. He did not make conversation. Clara noticed this and respected it. She understood, without being told, that Robert Morrison's presence in this room on this particular day was itself a form of statement. That a man who had come back from the Pacific in August, who had lost his brother to the Normandy beach in June of the previous year, who had every available reason to be somewhere else when 12 German women came to his family's table, was standing near the window with his coffee and his nod. That was sufficient. More than sufficient. In the corner near the fireplace, 2 children, a girl of perhaps 7 and a boy of 5, engaged with a wooden puzzle spread on the floor between them. They looked up when the women entered with the direct and total curiosity of small children who have not yet learned to disguise the fact of looking at something they are looking at. The girl said something to her father. Obert answered. She nodded and returned to her puzzle. The boy kept looking. He looked at the group of women with the specific, concentrated assessment of a child processing new information. The kind of looking that is not rude because it is entirely honest. The looking of someone who has not yet developed the social equipment to look any other way. He held a puzzle piece in one hand and looked. Then he held the piece out toward his sister as though the piece were more immediately important than the stranger's, which for him it probably was, and returned his attention to the puzzle. Eva had moved to the rug. She had sat down on it near the hearth with the natural ease of someone raised on floors, and without discussion or ceremony, the 2 children had shifted their puzzle slightly toward her, not toward the group, not toward the room in general, but specifically toward Eva, as though they had identified through some instinct unavailable to adults the one person in the room who would not make a ceremony of them. Clara watched this happen. She watched the puzzle pieces redistributed slightly in Eva's direction, and Eva accepting this reorientation with the same ease she brought to everything. Looking at the puzzle pieces with the same quality of attention she brought to the Indiana fields, the attention of someone who finds things interesting without requiring them to be significant. The girl held a piece up toward Eva and said something. Eva said something back in German. The girl did not understand the German, but she understood the tone, which was the tone of someone willing to engage with a puzzle. And she placed the piece in Eva's hand and pointed to the puzzle, and the transaction was complete. And the children had absorbed a former German signals auxiliary into their puzzle, with the radical and uncomplicated hospitality that children extend to people they have decided are acceptable, which is a hospitality based on entirely different criteria from the adult version, and which, in Clara's observation, was considerably more often correct. Dorothy appeared from the kitchen at intervals. She came in, assessed the room with the brief practical attention of a woman who understands hospitality as a function rather than a performance, identified what was needed, provided it, and returned to the kitchen. Coffee in a large pot set on the table near the fire without announcement. A plate of small cookies beside the coffee, set down and left without invitation or elaboration, as though the cookies simply needed to be there, and now they were. Clara took a cup of coffee and held it in both hands. She sat in a chair near the fire and felt the warmth come into her palms and worked at the language around her, Patterson moving between the women and the Americans who were present. The broken exchanges of people finding their way through two languages with goodwill substituting for fluency, which was not an inadequate substitution. She was better at English than most of the others. She could follow the basic shape of conversations not directed at her, filling in the gaps from context, which was a teacher's skill, and one she was glad to have here. She noticed things, the objects on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. A clock in a dark wooden case, ticking with the steady authority of a thing that had been reliable for a long time. A ceramic figure of a blue bird. Two small framed photographs. The photographs were too far away for her to see clearly from where she sat, and she did not get up to look at them. But she was aware of them in the way she was aware of everything in the room, with the patient accumulation of the observer, who knows that not everything reveals itself immediately and that the quality of the waiting matters. The smells from the kitchen continued to develop. By 10:30, the roasting meat smell had deepened to a register that was no longer simply appetizing but physical, the smell working on the body at a level below preference, activating something older than hunger. Beneath it, the sweetness had intensified, and Patterson, asked by Eva in a whisper, said, "Pies. Several of them, apple and pumpkin." He explained pumpkin pie with the slight awkwardness of a man describing something so familiar to him that the description feels unnecessary, and the German women who heard the explanation were quiet for a moment. Pumpkin pie. Not because the words were difficult, because the concept required adjustment. The idea of a gourd transformed through spice and sweetness and pastry into something that a family made for their most important holiday. That a woman had been in the kitchen since 4 in the morning producing was a concept that arrived in the context of 1944 and 1945 Germany with the specific force of abundance encountered in its most domestic form. Not military abundance, not institutional abundance, the abundance of a kitchen that had never been asked to ration what it made. Lena, the postal clerk, had put her coat down. Clara noticed this without comment. It had happened quietly, without ceremony. The coat sat on the arm of the sofa at some point in the previous 30 minutes, folded rather than draped, the care of the folding indicating that the putting down was not carelessness, but decision. She was staying. She had decided she was staying. Clara looked back at the fire. She thought about Agnes in the compound. She thought about the dark blue scarf at her throat, its weight and warmth, and about what Agnes had known when she gave it. That the farm would require warmth, that Clara's coat collar did not close properly, that there was a gap in Clara's preparation that Agnes could fill without saying what the filling meant. She thought about Agnes on her bunk above the empty one, maintaining her position with the compressed consistency that had characterized her for 4 months, maintaining it this morning while 12 women boarded a bus to a farm in Indiana for Thanksgiving. She thought about what it had cost Agnes to give the scarf. She was still thinking about it when Dorothy Morrison came into the room and stood near the door and said, through Patterson, that the table was ready if everyone wanted to come through. The table. Clara had been preparing herself for the table since the bus, since the driveway, since the entrance hall and the small red rubber boots and the fire and the coffee and the smell from the kitchen building itself over the morning toward this. She had been moving toward the table since Ruth had come back to the barracks with the information about a farm family and an invitation, and she had been accumulating preparation for it the way you accumulate preparation for things that you understand in advance will be significant without knowing yet the precise form the significance will take. She was not prepared. This was not a failure of preparation. It was the nature of the thing itself. That the table, when you came to it, was not the table you had been preparing for. That the real thing was always more specific than the imagined version, always more detailed and more present and more demanding of the full attention, and that the full attention was the only adequate response to it. The table was long. It ran the length of the room's far end with the white cloth on it that Clara had glimpsed from the doorway, and the cloth was not formal table linen, but the good household cloth of a farm family, washed and ironed and laid with the care of people who understand that the cloth is not decoration but respect. Respect for the table, for the food that will be on it, for the people who will sit at it. Places were set along both sides with plates and flatware and glasses and folded napkins, 14 places in all. The Morrison family distributed along one side with 2 empty chairs at the head and foot for Harold and Dorothy, and the 12 German women distributed along the other. Clara looked at this arrangement. 12 German women along one side of the table, a farm family along the other. No barrier between the sides. No administrative division. Simply the table, white-clothed and set, the same cloth and the same flatware and the same folded napkins on both sides. The equality of the setting so complete and so unapologetic that it produced a quality of silence among the women. As they came to their chairs, that was not the silence of discomfort, but of people confronted with something they had not fully allowed themselves to anticipate. At the center of the table, the food. It had come from the kitchen in a progression while the women found their chairs, Dorothy and Robert moving between the table and the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this many times. The large roasting pan first, set at the center with the turkey golden and brown from hours in the oven, its smell arriving in the room in full force now. Unmediated, the smell from the bus and the entrance hall resolved at last into its source. Then the surrounding dishes, a ceramic bowl of mashed potatoes, white and smooth, steam rising from the surface. A dish of something orange that Patterson identified quietly as sweet potatoes with butter. Green beans cooked with what appeared to be small pieces of bacon. A boat of gravy, dark and thick. A basket of bread rolls, golden topped, the smell of their baking adding itself to everything else. A plate of cranberry sauce, the deep red of it glossy in the light, a color Clara had not seen in anything she had eaten in 2 years. And at each end of the table, the pies, 2 at each end. The apple pies golden crusted with the crimped edges of a practiced hand, the steam still moving in thin lines from the cuts in the crust. And the pumpkin pies beside them, smooth and dark orange in their pastry shells, dusted at the edge with what Patterson confirmed was cinnamon. Clara looked at the pies. She looked at the whole table. She had been in the compound's mess hall 3 times a day for 4 months, and the mess hall had fed her adequately, and she had not been hungry in any sustained way since the first weeks after capture. And she had registered this adequacy as something significant without allowing herself to register it too fully, without allowing the significance to become gratitude before she understood what the gratitude would mean. But the mess hall and this table were not the same thing, and she had known they would not be the same thing, and the knowing had been correct. The mess hall fed you. This table was something else. Harold Morrison stood at the head of it. He waited for everyone to be seated. The 12 women arranged along their side with the slight formality of people in an unfamiliar situation finding the correct posture, Patterson seated near the end with his clipboard abandoned for once on a chair behind him. Lieutenant Carr at the foot looking at the table with the expression of a man who had attended enough Army Thanksgiving meals in mess halls to be quietly struck by the difference. Dorothy at the opposite head, Robert beside his children, who were kneeling on their chairs in the way of children too small for the height of the table and too interested in what was on it to manage posture. Harold looked along the table. He looked along the German side and along the family side and at the food between them, and he looked at all of this with the unhurried attention of a man who has been farming for 3 decades and has learned to see what is actually in front of him, rather than what he expects. Then he said he would like to say grace. Patterson translated this. He said it was something their family did every year, and he hoped the women would not mind, and that they were welcome to participate as they saw fit or simply to sit quietly while the family observed the tradition. He said this with the same plainness he brought to everything, not asking permission exactly, but making room for the women to be present without requiring them to be something they were not, to observe without being required to participate, to receive the hospitality without being required to adopt its forms. Clara straightened in her chair. She looked at Harold Morrison at the head of the table. He bowed his head. The room went quiet, a quiet that was not imposed but that arrived naturally, the way quiet arrives when something is about to be said that the room understands is worth the silence before it. Harold spoke. His voice was not loud. It was the voice of a man accustomed to speaking in the open air, where carrying the sound required less effort than it did indoors, and it had a quality of simplicity that was not the simplicity of an uncomplicated mind. but of a man who had arrived through decades of work and loss at the understanding that the essential things could be said plainly, and that plain saying was more honest than elaborate saying. Patterson translated in a low and careful voice beside Clara. Harold thanked God for the harvest. He thanked him for the land and for the rain that had come at the right time this year, for the corn and for the beans and for the animals that had wintered through. He thanked him for the end of the war. He said this slowly and with a weight that the other Thanksgivings had not carried, as though the end of the war were a harvest of a different kind, gathered in at a cost that the gratitude was not adequate for, but that the gratitude was offered toward anyway, as the only available response to a gift whose price could not be stated in the same breath as the giving. He thanked him for Robert coming home. These words arrived and stayed. Clara heard them and felt where they went. He said Robert's name and he said coming home, and Patterson translated it, and the room held the words for a moment in the way rooms hold things that are true, and waited, and said in the plain voice of a man who means them. Then Harold was quiet for a moment. The quiet was different from the quiet before he had begun. It had something in it, something that the room could feel gathering in the quality of Harold Morrison's silence. In the particular way, he was standing at the head of the table with his head bowed and his hands flat on the white cloth and the food on the table between him and his family and the 12 German women along the other side. He said Thomas's name. He said Thomas could not be here and that they felt that absence today as they felt it every day, and that they were grateful to have had him for the years they had, and that the gratitude and the loss were the same feeling differently faced, and that they asked for the strength to carry both without letting one cancel the other. Patterson's voice beside Clara had gone very quiet. He was translating carefully, with the concentrated effort of a man reaching for precision in a second language, because the precision mattered, because the man at the head of the table deserved precision. Clara listened to Harold's words translated into German, and she listened to what was around the words. The kitchen clock ticking on the mantelpiece, the fire settling in the hearth, the 2 children kneeling on their chairs in the particular stillness of children who have heard their uncle's name said in this way before, and who have learned, through the gentle education of family, what that stillness means and why it is given. Robert's eyes were on the table. Dorothy's hands were folded on the cloth. Harold said amen. Several voices around the table said amen. Clara said it too. She said it without deciding to, which was perhaps the most honest way to say it. Not as a performance of participation, not as a concession to the form, but as the simple involuntary response of a person whose body had recognized the weight of what had just been said and had offered the only word the moment had available for it. She was not certain she had believed in anything that word pointed toward for some years. She was not certain she didn't. Harold looked up. He looked along the table and he said in the plain voice that they should eat while it was hot. They ate. This required its own accounting. Clara had been fed adequately for 4 months, and she had noted the adequacy at each meal with the same observational precision she brought to everything. The protein, the bread, the portion size, the small weekly variations in the mess hall menu that she had cataloged without entirely meaning to. She had noted the adequacy as significant and had been fed by the noting, by the understanding that the adequacy was itself a form of information about the place she was in and the system she was inside. This was not the mess hall. The turkey came to her plate with the dark, rich smell of hours of patient heat, and she ate it and tasted the time in it. The long, slow conversion of raw meat into something that was no longer simply protein, but the result of sustained attention, of a cook who had checked and basted and waited and checked again and waited until the waiting had produced exactly this. The mashed potatoes were smooth with real butter, the butter not rationed, not stretched, not the gray and inadequate butter substitute she had grown accustomed to, but real butter worked into the potatoes by someone who knew how much was enough and was using enough. She ate the sweet potatoes. She had never eaten sweet potatoes. She put them in her mouth and tasted something that was so completely outside her culinary framework that she stopped eating for a moment and simply held the flavor. Sweet and earthy and warm with butter and something else she could not identify, that Patterson, asked by Eva with a small gesture toward the dish, identified as brown sugar and a spice called nutmeg. Eva said nutmeg in German to herself, as though filing the word. Clara filed it too. The sweet potatoes tasted like November. She was not sure this was a rational observation, and she did not particularly care, because the observation was accurate, and accuracy was what she trusted, and the accuracy of it was that the sweet potato tasted exactly like what the Indiana November looked like from the compound fence. The flat brown richness of the harvested fields under the gray sky, the warmth that persisted beneath the cold, the earthen sweetness of something that had come out of this specific ground and been treated with sufficient attention to reveal what it actually was. She ate everything on her plate. Dorothy came around the table with the turkey and offered more. She did this with the attentiveness of a hostess who has been watching each plate without appearing to watch each plate, who understands hospitality as a continuous form of attention that does not draw attention to itself. She offered without asking, moving a question from the domain of negotiation into the domain of simple provision. Not "do you want more?" with its requirement of a decision and the possible embarrassment of the wrong decision, but simply "here is more, available, if you want it." Several women held up their plates. Clara held up hers. She watched Dorothy serving the women along the German side of the table. Each one offered the same attentiveness, the same gesture, the same quality of care that made no distinction between the plates. She watched this and thought about the word Patterson had used when describing the invitation. Guests, he had said. The captain had said guests. And she thought about what the word meant in this room, which was what it had always meant when it was used correctly and was so rarely used correctly. Guest. A person whose presence has been prepared for, whose arrival has been anticipated, whose comfort is being actively considered by someone who has no obligation to consider it, except the one they have taken on by extending the invitation. A person who has been welcomed into the life of a place, rather than processed through a facility. She had not been a guest anywhere since before the war. She ate Dorothy's turkey and thought about this. At the far end of the table, Eva was talking to Robert Morrison. Or rather, they were managing something in the direction of talking, through Patterson and through the inadequate vocabulary of two people finding the edges of their shared language, which was minimal but not nothing. Robert was showing his son something at the table, a piece of bread folded in a particular way. And Eva was watching and saying something in German, and Patterson was translating it, and Robert was answering, and the children were attending to this exchange with the interest they gave to things that involved adults being slightly less competent than usual, which children universally find entertaining. Clara watched Robert's face. The quietness was still there. The quietness she had noticed when he was standing at the window. But it was doing something different now than it had been doing then. It was not withdrawn but present. The quietness of someone who has brought themselves fully to a difficult table and is discovering that the difficulty is not what they expected, or that the difficulty and something else are present simultaneously. The way Harold had said the gratitude and the loss were the same feeling differently faced. She thought about this phrasing. The gratitude and the loss are the same feeling differently faced. She thought about it carefully, with the attention she had given her students' most careful essays, the ones that arrived at something true rather than something adequate. She thought about whether it was true. She turned it over and applied it to the things she was carrying, and found that it was true in a way that she had not had the language for before Harold Morrison said it over the white cloth and the turkey and the pies at the end of the table. She carried this forward. She would carry it for a long time. By the time Dorothy began clearing the main dishes for the pies, the table had changed, not in any dramatic way. Not with an announcement or a ceremony or a visible threshold that could be identified later as the moment. Simply in the way that a room changes over the course of a meal when the meal is being taken seriously. The slight relaxation of posture that comes after an hour of shared food. The slight increase in the volume of conversation. The slight adjustment in the quality of attention from the formal alertness of arrival to something more settled and less defended. Lena was talking to Dorothy. Or attempting to, with Patterson carrying the essential freight of the exchange, and Lena supplementing with the German-English mixture that the compound had produced in several of the women who worked regularly with the American staff. She was asking about the cranberry sauce, which she had eaten with the particular attention that Clara had noticed. The deep red, glossy preserve, eaten slowly and with a slight expression of concentration, as though the flavor were a text to be read carefully. Lena was asking what it was made from, what process produced the texture, whether it could be made in a domestic kitchen or required equipment she would not have. Dorothy was answering with the specificity of a woman who takes cooking questions seriously, who understands that asking how something is made is not small talk, but genuine interest. They were having a real conversation. The form of it was halting and mediated, and required Patterson's assistance at every third exchange. The content of it was one woman asking another woman how to make a thing she had found beautiful. Clara looked at this and felt the gap between the form and the content as the most important gap in the room. Eva and the children had left the table. They were back at the puzzle near the fireplace, the three of them on the rug with the pieces spread between them. And the puzzle appeared to be nearing completion in a way it had apparently not been nearing before Eva arrived, which said something about Eva's spatial reasoning or about the motivating effect of a competent stranger on children who had been circling the same intractable problem. The boy had abandoned any pretense of focusing on the puzzle and was simply watching Eva put pieces in with the open admiration of a 5-year-old observing a person who is good at something. Robert was at the window again. He was looking out at the fields with his coffee and the quietness, and Clara thought about approaching him and decided against it, not because it would have been wrong, but because it was not what he needed from this afternoon, and she was capable of identifying what people needed from an afternoon, and of understanding that the identification was a form of respect. Dorothy came from the kitchen with the pies. She carried 2 at a time, one in each hand with the ease of someone for whom a pie is not a precious or fragile object, but a working thing, produced to be eaten, carried to the table where the eating will happen. She set them at the center of the table in the places she had cleared. The apple pies first, then the pumpkin, and the smell of them arrived with them in the room the way the kitchen smell had arrived in the bus and the entrance hall, insistent and warm and asking for nothing but acknowledgement. Clara looked at the pies. She thought about her mother's kitchen in Hamburg. The thought arrived without her reaching for it, which was how the important thoughts arrived, not summoned but finding the opening, the moment of sufficient quiet in the observational apparatus through which they moved from the place they had been waiting into the available space of the present. Her mother had made apple cake on Sundays, not pie exactly, Apfelkuchen on a baking sheet, the apples layered in rings on the batter, the whole surface dusted with cinnamon sugar before the oven, and coming out golden and fragrant with the specific warmth of cinnamon over apple, over caramelized sugar over butter. The kitchen on Sunday mornings, the oven heating the room above the Hamburg November outside the windows, her father at the table with the newspaper, the sound of the tray being set on the counter to cool. She had not thought about this in months. She thought about it now and let it be what it was, which was the past. The past entirely, the Hamburg that had been and was not. Her parents who were alive or were not, and whose status she did not yet know with certainty and was not going to know today. The Sunday kitchen that existed now only in this way, in this specific form of survival, which was the survival of a thing inside a person who remembered it and would remember it for as long as she was alive to remember anything. She let the thought rest. Dorothy cut the pies. She cut the apple pie first with the clean entry of a knife applied at the correct angle by hands that had done this many times. And she placed the first slice on a plate and passed it along the table, and the plate moved from hand to hand along the German side the way things move along a table when the table has become a table and not an arrangement of people who happen to be seated in proximity to each other. Clara received her slice. She looked at it. The apple filling was still warm, the pieces holding their shape within the cinnamon-darkened syrup, the edges of the cut releasing the steam and the smell directly. The crust was gold at the top, slightly darker at the base where it had met the dish. The crimping at the edge, the crimping of long practice. Each press of the fingers the same as the one before it, because the person who had made it this way many times, and the making had become the kind of knowledge that lives in the hands rather than the mind. She took a bite. She tasted it the way she had tasted everything this afternoon, with the full and undivided attention of someone who has decided to be present for what is being offered, not to manage it from a distance or file it as evidence or process it through the account, but simply to be in the eating of it while the eating was happening. The cinnamon was warm. The apple was tart beneath the sweetness. The butter in the crust dissolved with the specific quality of pastry made with the right fat in the right amount by hands that knew how much was right. She tasted her mother's kitchen. She tasted it and let it be there, and let the Hamburg sundae be there, and let the tray cooling on the counter be there. And she also let Indiana be there, this farmhouse in the November flat of the Indiana landscape, this table and this family and the grace Harold Morrison had said over it. She let both be there. They were both true. They were both hers. She took a second bite and looked at the fire and did not try to do anything with what she was feeling except feel it, which was, she thought, possibly the most honest thing she had done since France. The afternoon light shifted. It came through the west windows at a lower angle now, the November sun moving toward the tree line without urgency, laying long, pale rectangles across the wooden floor. The fire had settled from its morning height into the steady, deep burn of a fire well past its peak, and still giving everything it had left. The table had been cleared, not fully. The pies remained, and the coffee Dorothy had brought out after the meal, and the particular pleasant disorder of a table that has been used seriously, the white cloth marked in small ways by the afternoon, a ring from a coffee cup, a crumb or two near the bread basket, evidence of a meal that had actually happened rather than been performed. Clara held her coffee in both hands. She was not analyzing anything. She was aware of this as a fact worth noting. For 4 months, her mind had been running continuously, observing, filing, comparing, building the account and revising it, the analytical apparatus operating without rest, because rest felt like risk. It was not running now. It had done something she had not asked it to do, which was to stop. Not because the observations had ended, but because somewhere between the grace and the apple pie and the taste of her mother's kitchen, it had decided that the present moment was sufficient, that it did not need to be processed into evidence, that it could simply be inhabited. She sat in the inhabited present and drank her coffee. Across the table, Dorothy was speaking to Lena. The conversation had continued. Cranberry sauce had led somewhere else, to pickling, to preserves, to the question of how a farm family stored food through an Indiana winter, and Lena was listening with the complete attention of someone who has found a subject that connects to something she knows. Patterson translated in short bursts. Dorothy spoke in the practical cadences of a woman for whom this knowledge was daily rather than interesting. Lena asked a question. Dorothy answered. Lena asked another. Clara watched this. She watched 2 women talking about food across a table that 6 months ago would not have been imaginable. Not because either of them was unusual, because the war had not allowed for it, because the war had taken the ordinary categories of human exchange, curiosity, shared craft, the simple pleasure of comparing how a thing is done, and had suspended them behind the categories it required instead. The war was over. The categories it had required were still present, still operating in Agnes's bunk in the compound, and in Robert's window-facing quietness, and in the careful way certain women at this table had been holding themselves since the bus. But they were loosening, not disappearing, loosening. The distinction mattered. Harold Morrison had gone to the kitchen after the meal and come back with a worn, leather-bound Bible. Clara had noted this without comment, the way she noted everything. The Bible set on the sideboard behind his chair, his hand resting on it briefly before he sat back down with his coffee. She had assumed it was habitual. A farm family with a grace-saying father kept a Bible in the main room. This was not remarkable. She understood later that it was not habitual. It was intentional. She understood this when Harold looked along the table after the second cup of coffee had been poured and said through Patterson that there was something he did every Thanksgiving, that it was a family tradition, that his father had done it and his father before him. He said he hoped the women would not find it intrusive. He said they were welcome to listen or to step outside or simply to sit. He picked up the Bible. He opened it to a page marked with a folded piece of paper. He said he was going to read a letter. Patterson translated this, and the table went quiet. Not the formal quiet of the grace before the meal. A different quiet. The quiet of people who do not yet know what is coming and are holding space for it. Harold smoothed the page. He said the letter was from his son Thomas, written in May 1944 from England before the invasion. He said Thomas had asked him to read it aloud at Thanksgiving if Thomas could not be there to do it himself. He said Thomas had not known he would not be there. He had written it the way young men wrote things before dangerous crossings, not as farewell exactly, as insurance, as the thing you put in place because you have acknowledged a possibility you are not dwelling on. The room was absolutely still. Clara looked at Robert. He was looking at the table. Dorothy was looking at her hands. The two children had come back from the puzzle at some point and were on either side of their father. The girl with her head against his arm. The boy watching his grandfather with the serious attention of a child who has learned that this moment in this year is different from ordinary moments and that the difference requires sitting still. Harold began to read. His voice was steady. It was the voice of a man who had done difficult things steadily for a long time, and who had learned that steadiness was not the absence of feeling, but the decision to carry feeling without letting it carry you. Patterson translated in a low voice. The letter was not long. Thomas had written that he was well, and that England was green and wet, and that the food was not as good as his mother's, and nothing ever would be. He had written that he thought about the farm often. The particular smell of the fields in the morning before the heat came up, the sound of the barn in winter, the way the light came through the kitchen window in November and lay across the table in the early afternoon. He had written that he thought about Thanksgiving. He said he had been thinking about what thankfulness actually was. He said he had been raised to give thanks at the table and had done it his whole life without examining it closely. The way you do things that are so much part of the structure of living that the structure itself becomes invisible. But that he had been thinking about it here in England in May 1944 and had arrived at something he wanted to say. He said thankfulness was not a feeling. It was a direction. It was the decision to face toward what you had been given rather than toward what had been taken. Not because the taking was not real, not because the loss didn't count, but because the facing was a choice, and the choice was the only thing you had full authority over, and a person who gave up authority over the direction of their own attention had given up the most important thing. He said he was grateful for the farm, for his parents, for Robert, or the table and the food on it and the people around it. He said he was grateful even now in England in May, in the particular uncertainty of what was coming, that the gratitude was not conditional on the outcome, that it did not require him to come home for it to be true. He said he loved them. He said he would see them at Thanksgiving. Harold closed the Bible. He set it on the table and kept his hand on it. The room held what it had been given. Clara was not going to cry. She had not cried in a very long time, and she was not going to cry here, at this table, in front of these people. But there was something in her chest that was pressing against the usual containment. Something that the letter had found, and that the finding had made more precise. The grief and the gratitude are the same feeling, differently faced. Harold had said in the grace, and Thomas's letter had said the same thing from inside the experience of being 22, and in England in May, and looking at the crossing ahead, and the sameness of it across the father and the son, and across the gap of death between the writing and the reading was pressing against the containment. She kept it contained. But she let it press. That seemed the honest thing. Ava was not keeping it contained. She was not crying loudly. She was sitting at the table with her hands flat on the white cloth and her face directed at the space above the table, and her eyes bright in the way that 22-year-olds' eyes are bright when they have been given something true that they did not have words for yet. She did not look embarrassed by this. She simply was where she was with what had arrived there. Ruth was looking at the tablecloth. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face was still, but her husband's name was somewhere in the room. Clara could feel it without being told. The civil engineer who had died on a Tuesday on his way to work, who had been on a Berlin street when the morning became a different kind of morning, who had not sacrificed himself or been taken by ideology, but had simply been in the path of something enormous and impersonal. Ruth was at a table in Indiana listening to a man read his dead son's letter about thankfulness as a direction. She was sitting with this in the practical, forward-facing way she sat with everything. Clara thought about what thankfulness as a direction cost Ruth. She thought it cost a great deal. She thought Ruth was paying it anyway. Harold looked up from the Bible. He looked along the table and he said, quietly and without ceremony, that he was glad they were here. Not the women specifically, not the Germans specifically, simply they. The people at the table, the people who were here on this particular Thursday in November, in the Morrison farmhouse in Indiana. He said it in the plain voice and it arrived in the plain way. Patterson translated it. Several women said something in German. Patterson translated back. Harold nodded once. Then Dorothy stood and said there was more pie if anyone wanted it. There was more pie. Eva had a second slice of pumpkin. She ate it on the rug near the fire with the children, who had extracted her from the table with the persistent negotiations of children who have determined that a person belongs in their space and are not taking no for an answer. The boy had fallen asleep against her leg with the absolute confidence of a small child who has decided a person is trustworthy, which was a form of verdict that had no appeals process and required no argument. Clara watched him sleep. She thought about what it meant that a 5-year-old in Indiana had fallen asleep against a former German signals auxiliary on Thanksgiving afternoon. She thought about what account of the world made this possible. She thought about what account of the world had made it impossible for so long. She was still working on the second account. She was further along than she had been this morning. Lena had moved to the kitchen. This had happened gradually. The conversation with Dorothy about preserves and pickling had moved by natural degrees through the dining room and into the kitchen itself. And Lena was now standing at Dorothy's counter helping with the washing up in the particular way of a guest who has found their level of comfort and has expressed it through the offer of practical assistance, which is the offer that says I am comfortable enough here to be useful rather than simply received. Dorothy had handed her a dish towel. Clara had watched this happen and felt it as one of the afternoon's most significant moments, more significant in some ways than the letter, because the letter was Harold Morrison's gift to the room and the dish towel was Lena's. The postal clerk from Stuttgart, who had held her coat for the first hour and set it down and now had Dorothy's dish towel and was drying plates in an American farmhouse kitchen on Thanksgiving and asking questions about the preserves. The afternoon was going dark. The November light through the west windows had moved from gold to amber to the particular gray-pink of an Indiana late afternoon in autumn, the sky doing its flat and absolute thing, the colors more muted now, the day completing itself with the same efficiency with which it had begun. Robert Morrison was on the porch. Clara had seen him go out 20 minutes ago, quietly, without announcement, in the way of someone who needs the outside after an interior afternoon, who needs the cold and the open after the warmth and the contained. She had understood this completely. She had wanted to do it herself and had stayed because the staying seemed the thing to do. She got up from her chair. She went to the front door. She opened it and stepped onto the porch. The cold hit her immediately, clean and direct, the dark blue scarf at her throat. She pulled the coat closed and stood for a moment adjusting to the temperature. Robert was at the porch rail. He had his coffee. He was looking at the fields. The bare maple trees in the driveway made their pattern against the last light. The silo stood white against the darkening sky. The fields ran back to the horizon in the flat brown of a harvested Indiana November, bare and wide and completely themselves. He heard her come out. He didn't turn. He said, in English, that it was cold. Clara said yes. He said the farm looked different in November. He said he was still getting used to looking at it again. After the Pacific. Clara said she understood that. Coming back to a thing you had been away from long enough that you were not sure it would look the same. He was quiet for a moment. He said it looked the same. He said that was the strange part. Clara looked at the fields. She thought about Hamburg, about what Hamburg looked like now. Whether it looked the same or whether it looked like what she had read in the newspapers, the photographs of city centers reduced to the geometry of destruction. Walls without roofs, streets without buildings, the structure of a place persisting after everything that had made it a place was gone. She thought about what it would be to go back to it. She thought about whether she would go back to it. She did not have the answer yet. Robert said his brother had loved the farm in November. He said Thomas had thought autumn was the honest season, that the farm showed you what it actually was when the growing was done, that the bare fields and the bare trees were the farm's real face. Clara said she thought that was true of most things. The honest version available after the covering was gone. Robert looked at her briefly. He said yes. They stood on the porch in the cold for a few more minutes and said nothing else, and the nothing else was the right thing. Two people standing in the late afternoon on a farm porch in Indiana in November. Her country had killed his brother. His country had caught her. The war had done what it had done to all of them, and they were standing on the same porch, breathing the same cold air, looking at the same bare fields. Not resolved, not forgiven in any formal or declared sense, simply present, in the same cold, looking at the same farm. Patterson came to the door at 4:15. He said the bus was coming at 4:30. The women should gather their things. The gathering was quiet and somewhat slow, not reluctant exactly, more like the careful pace of people collecting themselves after something significant. The movement of people who want to give the leaving the right amount of time rather than rushing through it, because rushing would not honor what the afternoon had been. Lena came from the kitchen with flour on her hands. She looked at her hands and then at Dorothy, who was smiling. Lena looked for something to wipe them on, and Dorothy handed her the dish towel, and Lena wiped her hands and folded the towel and set it on the counter and looked at the kitchen. The clean dishes stacked in the rack, the pies on the counter, the warmth of the range still working in the room. She said something in German. Patterson translated it as "Thank you for teaching me the cranberry sauce." Dorothy said she was welcome and that the recipe was simple and she would write it down before they left. She went to the small desk in the kitchen and wrote the recipe on a piece of paper in her careful hand and folded it and gave it to Lena. Lena put it in her coat pocket with the deliberateness of someone putting away something they intend to keep. The children said goodbye to Eva with the directness of children. The boy, now awake, held up a puzzle piece toward her. One of the pieces that had been intractable all afternoon, the piece that had not found its place. Eva looked at it. She looked at the puzzle on the floor, nearly complete. She pointed to a section and the boy looked at it and looked at the piece and fitted it into the gap. It went in cleanly. The boy looked at it and then at Eva with an expression of pure satisfaction. Eva laughed. It was the laugh of someone who has not laughed in long enough that the laugh was slightly surprising to her, full and genuine and brief. Harold Morrison was at the door. He shook hands with each woman as she passed, not perfunctorily. He took each hand and looked at each face and held the handshake for the half-second longer that distinguishes a handshake that means something from one that observes a form. Clara came to him last. He took her hand. He said something that Patterson translated as he hoped the day had been good. She said it had been more than good. He looked at her for a moment. He said good. He said it the way his son had said thankfulness was a direction, as a word that meant exactly what it said and was content to mean it. She went down the porch steps. She stood on the gravel and put Agnes's scarf more securely at her throat and looked at the farmhouse. The lit windows in the darkening afternoon, the smoke from the two chimneys rising straight in the still air, the porch light coming on as Harold held the door for the last women coming out, the warm interior visible for a moment through the open door before it closed. She looked at it and held it. Then she got on the bus. The drive back was different from the drive out, not because the landscape had changed. The fields and the sky and the water tower and the bare trees were what they had been 4 hours ago. But the quality of looking at them was different. The women on the bus were not the same women who had been on the bus this morning, not transformed, not resolved, simply further along, whatever they had each been moving along. Nobody spoke much. Eva was asleep against the window before they reached the state road. The child's trust transferred to the bus seat without apparently requiring any adjustment. Ruth was looking at the road ahead. Her hands were folded, but the folding was different, looser. The hands of a woman who has set something down rather than a woman holding something up. Lena had her hand in her coat pocket, on the recipe card. Clara sat with her hands in her lap and looked through the window at the Indiana dark coming in from the east and thought about Thomas Morrison's letter. Thankfulness as a direction. She turned the phrase over, tested it, applied it to the things she was carrying. Her parents, unknown. Hamburg, unknown. The 7 months of the compound. The months before the compound. The account she had been building and the account she had arrived with, and the distance between them that she had been crossing since July. The distance was not crossed. She knew this. It would not be crossed in a day or a month or perhaps a year. But the direction was clearer than it had been this morning. She could face toward what she had been given and name it. She could do this from the compound. She could do it from wherever she ended up after the compound. She could do it the way Harold Morrison did it. At the table, in the plain voice, with the loss present and acknowledged and not allowed to cancel the gratitude. The direction was available. She was going to take it. The compound gate appeared ahead in the headlights. The gravel drive, the guard tower, the barracks behind the fence, the bare trees along the perimeter that she had watched lose their leaves in the space of a week. The bus slowed. The gate opened. She went through it. The barracks was quiet. Most women had gone directly to bed. The warmth and the food and the particular exhaustion of a significant day had done their work. The coal stove at the end of the room was burning steadily. The small lamp above the door was on. Bunk 9, Agnes above it. Clara stood at the foot of the bunk for a moment. Agnes's breathing was the breathing of someone who is not asleep and is not going to pretend to be asleep. It had a quality of waiting. Of someone who has been waiting since 9 in the morning. Clara unwound the scarf. She folded it carefully along its original folds. The dark blue wool, dense and warm. She reached up and set it on the shelf beside Agnes's pillow. Agnes was quiet. Clara sat on the bunk and took off her shoes and set them parallel beneath the frame. She looked at the wall, the water stain in the corner, the patch that hadn't held. Agnes said, from above, without coming down from it, "Was it cold?" Clara said the farm had a proper fire. A pause. Agnes said, "Good." Clara lay down. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about the 2 chimneys, the smoke rising straight in the still air, the lit windows going dark behind the closed door, Harold's hand, Thomas's letter, Dorothy's recipe in Lena's pocket, the boy's puzzle piece going in clean, Robert on the porch in the same cold, the gratitude and the loss, the same feeling, differently faced. She closed her eyes. Outside, the Indiana night was wide and cold, and the bare trees stood in it without complaint. The Morrison farm was 12 miles down the road in the dark, its fires banked now, its table cleared, its family inside it doing whatever families do after a day they will remember, which was probably nothing remarkable. Sleeping. Simply sleeping. The way people sleep when they have done a good thing. December arrived. The compound's population began to diminish. The repatriation transports left on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the departure days had a particular quality. The early morning gathering at the gate, the bags carried out, the small ceremonies of leaving that people perform when they are leaving a place they did not choose and are returning to one they are not certain of. The women who left did so with the forward lean of people who had decided that forward was the only available direction, regardless of what waited in it. Clara watched them go from the records office window. The barracks emptied row by row. Bunk 9 was still occupied. Agnes above it was still occupied. Neither of them had submitted their names for the December transport. Neither had discussed this with the other. It was the kind of unspoken agreement that 4 months of proximity produces. The understanding that what was not said between them was not unsaid because it was unimportant, but because saying it would require a conversation that neither was ready to have, and both knew they would eventually need to. The conversation came on a Thursday evening in mid-December, not because the timing was chosen, because Agnes came down from her bunk. She did this so rarely. The bunk was her position, her maintained elevation, the physical fact of being above the ordinary level of the barracks floor, that when she descended it carried weight. She sat on the edge of Clara's bunk. She looked at the wall, the water stain, the patch that hadn't held. She said she had a letter from her son, the older one, the one who had come back from the Eastern Front in October and was living with a cousin in Bavaria. She had received it Monday and had been on her bunk with it since. She had read it enough times that she knew it without looking at it, but she was still looking at it, still turning it over, still finding in it the thing that she was trying to locate precisely before she acted on it. She said he was well. She said he was 19 years old. She said he was asking when she was coming home. Clara said nothing. Agnes folded the letter along its creases. She looked at it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said that she did not know what home was now. She said she knew where it had been. She said it had been Munich. But Munich was rubble and the apartment was gone and her husband was dead, and the life that had constituted home was not there anymore, had not been there since 1942, and what remained was a city in ruins where her son was not, and a cousin's spare room in Bavaria where he was. She said she was not going to a cousin's spare room. She said she was going to her son. She said it plainly, the way she said things that were decided. But underneath the plainness was something Clara had not heard from Agnes before, which was not certainty but its opposite. The particular quality of a woman who has arrived at a conclusion not because the conclusion was comfortable, but because it was honest. And honesty had required a cost she had been unwilling to pay for a long time, and was now paying. She was going back to Germany. She was going because her son was there. She was going because the argument for staying, that she would not be paraded through American life for anyone's benefit, that she owed nothing to any of this, that her position was her position and she was keeping it, had met something in December that it had not fully met in November, which was a 19-year-old boy's handwriting asking when she was coming home. The position had not dissolved. It had simply encountered something larger than itself. Clara said she was glad about the letter. Agnes said yes. She said she supposed she should thank Clara for the report on the farm. Clara looked at her. Agnes said she had asked. She said she had asked Patterson on Friday, casually, in the way that made it appear to be casual. She said she had asked how it had gone, and Patterson had told her about the meal, and the grace and the letter that Harold Morrison had read, and about the boy asleep against Eva's leg, and about Lena and the dish towel and the cranberry sauce recipe in the coat pocket. She said she had asked about the scarf. Clara said the scarf had been warm. Agnes looked at the wall. She said she had not wanted to go. She said this was still true. She said she had not been able to be the kind of person who could go. She said she was not sure she was capable of being the kind of person who could go, and she was not apologizing for this, but that she had understood since November that the kind of person she was had cost her something in that afternoon. Not the meal, not the fire, not even the letter. She said she had understood from Patterson's account that the Morrison family had a son who had not come back. Clara said yes. Agnes was quiet. She said that a family that had lost a son and set 12 German women at their Thanksgiving table was a thing she did not have a frame for. She said she was not going to pretend to have a frame for it. She said it had been sitting in her since Patterson told her, and she had not found the place to put it, and she was not sure she would. She said she was going home to her son. She said she was going to find a way to tell him something about the Morrison family. She was not sure yet what she was going to tell him. She was not sure she had the language for it, but she was going to try because the alternative was not telling him, and not telling him seemed like the wrong decision for the same reason that the farm had cost her something by not going, because there were things in the world that required acknowledgement even from people who did not have the equipment for it. She got up. She went back up to her bunk. Clara lay in the dark. She thought about Agnes up there with the letter from her son, the compression of her, the cost of the compression, the way it had held since July against everything the compound and the newspapers and the Thanksgiving and the accumulated weight of evidence had produced, the way it had held until a 19-year-old boy wrote, "When are you coming home?" She thought about what held people, not positions, not ideology, not the machinery of belief that a system installed and maintained through repetition and reward. Those things held people the way the war had held them, by force and by the absence of alternatives. What actually held people was smaller. A son's handwriting, a scarf given without ceremony, the particular weight of flour on a woman's hands, a puzzle piece going in clean. Clara submitted her name for the January transport. She did this on a Monday morning at the administration desk with the same hand she used for the records office filing. Steadily, without drama, the pen moving across the form with the precision her father had required of her at a school desk in Hamburg 30 years ago. She handed the form to the clerk. The clerk stamped it. She went back to work. She had decided in the way she made all significant decisions, which was not in a single moment, but through the accumulation of moments that each moved the needle slightly, each added to the account until the account produced its reading, and the reading was clear. She had been accumulating since July. The account was clear. She was going home. She did not know what home was. This was the same thing Agnes had said, and it was true for both of them. And it was true for most of the women in the compound, and true for most of the people on both sides of a war that had rearranged the geography of belonging so completely that returning to a place and coming home were no longer the same thing. Might not be the same thing for years. But she was going back to Hamburg, to whatever Hamburg was now. She was going to find out what remained and what had been destroyed and what her parents were, and she was going to do this from inside the place rather than from Indiana, because the honest account required it. The honest account said she had been part of something that had happened in Germany, and that the reckoning with what she had been part of needed to happen in Germany, needed to be done in the rubble of it, and in the rebuilt streets, and in the faces of the people who were doing the rebuilding, and in the schools where the children would be taught, and in the classrooms where she might teach them. She was a teacher. She had been a teacher before she had been anything the war had made her. She was still a teacher. The classroom was the frame she had for the honest account. The students were the reason to maintain it. The 14-year-olds who would need to be given, unlike the generation before them, the tools to examine the system they were living inside, not from outside it, not from Indiana, not from the distance of a compound fence, but from within it, with their eyes open and the account maintained, and the questions asked that needed to be asked, even when the asking was difficult. Especially when the asking was difficult. She went back to the records office. She filed the morning's documentation. She looked out the window at the bare trees and the gray December sky and the town beyond the fence, and she thought about Thomas Morrison's letter. The direction was available regardless of where she was standing. Hamburg was a direction. Ruth was leaving on the same transport. She came to Clara on the Tuesday before with the practical directness she brought to everything and said she had family in Berlin, a sister, alive, a displaced person's address that the Red Cross had confirmed last week. She said the sister had 2 children in a room and was asking Ruth to come. She said this was the clearest available option, and she was taking the clearest available option. Clara said that sounded like Ruth. Ruth said yes. Then Ruth said something that Clara had not expected. She said that the Morrison farm had given her something she had not known she needed. She said she had been thinking about what Thomas's letter had said about thankfulness as a direction, and that she had been trying it. She said she was trying it carefully, without rushing it, because she was not a person who rushed things. But she was trying it. She said her husband had liked November. She said he had liked the flat gray light. She said she had been able to think about this since Thanksgiving, without the thought going somewhere she could not follow it. She said it still went somewhere difficult, but now it went somewhere she could follow. She said she thought that was progress. Clara said she thought so too. Ruth nodded once and went back to her bunk. Eva was not leaving. This had become clear in early December, not through announcement, but through the same gradual accumulation by which most things became clear in the compound. She had submitted the forms for alternative status. Patterson had helped her with the documentation. Lieutenant Carr had signed the supporting letter. The Morrison family had offered sponsorship. This last fact was Dorothy's doing. She had come to the camp in December twice more, once with a basket of Christmas baking, the stollen and the gingerbread, distributed in the barracks with the practical warmth of a woman who understood that a holiday required acknowledgement regardless of the circumstances of the people it was being offered to. The second time to speak with the administration about Eva. Dorothy had asked Patterson on Thanksgiving what would happen to the women. Patterson had explained repatriation. He had explained alternative status. He had explained the sponsorship requirement. Dorothy had said nothing immediately. She had gone home and talked to Harold. Harold had said yes the same day. Clara knew this because Eva had told her. She had told her quietly on an evening in early December, sitting on the edge of Clara's bunk the way Agnes had sat. The posture of someone bringing something important and knowing it is important. She had said Dorothy and Harold had offered. She had said she was going to accept. She had said she had written to her mother in Thuringia, and her mother had said the same thing she said every time Eva wrote to her, which was that she was glad Eva was safe and that she should do what she thought was right. Eva said she thought staying was right, not because Germany was gone, not because the village was gone, but because she was different from the person who had left the village, and going back to it as the different person would be a confusion that the village did not deserve and that she was not sure she could navigate. She needed room to be the different person. Indiana was room. Clara looked at her. She thought about the 22-year-old from Thuringia who had sat on a rug near a fire and let 2 American children redistribute their puzzle toward her without making anything of it. She thought about the directness, the openness, the quality of simply looking at things and letting them be what they were. She thought that Indiana was lucky. She said so. Eva said that was an odd way to put it. Clara said she was a teacher. She was allowed to put things oddly. Eva laughed, the laugh again, full and genuine. The night before the January transport, Clara lay on bunk 9 for the last time. Agnes was already gone. She had left on the December transport, 3rd Thursday, her bag packed with the geometric precision she brought to everything. The packed bag of a woman who had been organizing supplies for years and knew how to use available space. She had come down from the bunk the morning of her departure. She had stood beside Clara's bunk. She had said nothing for a moment. Then she had held out the dark blue scarf. Clara had looked at it. Agnes said she had a coat that closed properly, and Clara's still didn't, and Germany in January was cold, and she would be in Bavaria, which was warm enough, and Clara would need it more. Clara said she could not take it. Agnes said she was not asking. She set it on bunk 9 and picked up her bag and walked to the gate. Clara had watched her go. She had stood in the compound yard with the others gathered to see off the December transport, and she had watched Agnes Bremer walk through the gate with her bag and her compressed bearing and the dark coat over it all, and she had thought about everything Agnes had been for 4 months. The bunk above, the silence that was not silence, the scarf given and reclaimed and given again. And she had felt the particular quality of loss that comes from the ending of an adjacency, the loss not of a friend exactly, not of an ally, but of a person whose specific presence in your specific proximity has become structural, has become part of the architecture of the days, and whose absence produces a change in the architecture you have to relearn the room around. Agnes had looked back once at the gate, not at Clara specifically, at the compound, at the barracks and the fence and the bare trees and the gray December sky. She had looked at it with the expression Clara could not read from this distance, but that she recorded anyway, stored in the account, available for whatever interpretation the future might produce. Then she had gone through the gate. Clara lay on bunk 9 with the dark blue scarf on the shelf above her head. Her bag was packed in beside the bunk. Everything she owned was in it, which was not much and was enough. The civilian clothes that were now worn into the shape of her life rather than the shape of someone else's, the photographs she had kept, the letters from the Red Cross, the grammar books, the small notebook she had been writing in since Thanksgiving. The notebook. She had been writing in it since the night she came back from the Morrison farm. Not the analytical observations she had been accumulating since July. Not the account, not the data points, not the evidence. Something different. Something that was trying to find the form that the afternoon had given her. The form of looking directly at the difficult things and letting them be what they were alongside the other things. The warm things. The things that Dorothy Morrison had been cooking since 4 in the morning. She had been trying to write toward the honest account. She was not finished. She would not be finished for years. But the writing was the practice, and the practice was available in Hamburg as much as in Indiana. Available at any desk in any room in any city. Available on any morning when she chose to pick it up rather than set it down. She was going to keep picking it up. She looked at the ceiling. Bunk 14 was empty above her. Agnes's shelf was empty. The blue scarf was on Clara's shelf. She thought about what she would say to her students. Not the specific lessons, not the curriculum, the larger thing. The thing beneath the literature and the composition, beneath the grammar and the assigned texts, beneath the structure of the school day and the requirements of the syllabus. The thing she had not known how to say before the war, and that the war had destroyed, and that the compound and the Morrison farm, and 7 months of paying close attention to the gap between what she had been told and what was actually true, had given her in a new form. She would tell them to look. She would tell them to look at everything. At the comfortable things and the uncomfortable things. At the official account and the evidence that complicated it. At the country they were living in and the one that it had been. She would tell them that looking was not disloyalty. That the honest account was not the enemy of love, but the condition of it. That you could not love a thing you had not looked at, not really, because the thing you loved would be the version you had invented rather than the thing itself. She would tell them about thankfulness as a direction. She would not tell them it was easy. She would tell them it was available. She would let them decide. The bus left Camp Atterbury at 8 in the morning. Clara sat near the window. Eva was at the gate to see them off. She stood beside Dorothy Morrison, who had driven in from the farm at 7, who had apparently decided that seeing off was the kind of thing that required presence and had organized her morning accordingly. She had a basket. Of course she had a basket. Clara could see from the bus window that it was covered with a cloth and that something warm was in it for the drive. And she thought about Lena's cranberry sauce recipe in the coat pocket, and about the index card in Dorothy's careful handwriting, and about the recipe that had been written down, because writing it down was how you kept it. She looked at Eva. Eva was 22 years old and standing beside Dorothy Morrison in the January cold of a camp gate in Indiana, and she was not looking at the bus with the expression of loss. She was looking at it with the expression she brought to everything, which was the expression of someone looking at a thing that is what it is, and finding that sufficient. The bus was leaving. Clara was on it. These were facts. They were true facts, and she was looking at them as true facts. She raised her hand. Clara raised hers. The bus moved. The gate closed behind it. The road opened ahead. Clara looked at the Indiana landscape for the last time in January light. The flat brown fields, the bare trees, the enormous sky deciding on gray. She had arrived in this landscape in July, not knowing what it was. She was leaving it in January knowing it was this. Flat and cold and enormous and direct and incapable of softening anything and entirely itself. She would not forget it. She looked forward. Hamburg in March 1946. She had prepared herself. She had not been prepared. The city was not the city she had left. This was known. She had known it from the photographs in the American newspapers, from the Red Cross letters, from the reports that had accumulated since July into a picture of a Hamburg that was not Hamburg but the geometry of Hamburg's foundations. The bones of it, the street plan and the harbor outline preserved beneath the devastation, the way a skeleton preserves the shape of what it held. She stood at the edge of what had been her street. The building was gone, not damaged, gone. In its place, a cleared space where someone had begun removing rubble and had stopped partway through, the clearing incomplete, the bricks stacked in rough rows along what had been the pavement, the work interrupted by something and not yet resumed. She stood there for a long time. She was not going to cry here either, not on this street, not at the cleared space where the building had been. She had been through enough that the mechanisms of public collapse were not available for this, not because the collapse was not warranted, but because the collapse served no one, and the situation required something more useful. She looked at the cleared bricks. She thought about Harold Morrison's hand on the Bible. She thought about Thomas. She faced toward what she had been given and named it. Her parents, whatever they were, named. Her students, the 6 years in the school near the Ulster, named. The compound, the 7 months of paying attention, named. Eva on the rug, Lena in the dish towel, Ruth's hands loosening. Agnes's scarf, named. Dorothy's kitchen, the smell of it through the bus ventilation on a November morning, named. The pie on the table with the steam still rising from the cuts, named. She named all of it, and she faced it, and she held the facing as the direction, and she stood on the Hamburg street in the March cold with Agnes's scarf at her throat, and she stayed standing. She found a room in the Altstadt. Small, clean, a window with a view of a rebuilt street. Not her street, not the WWII, but a street where the rebuilding was underway and the scaffolding was up and the sounds of construction started before 7 in the morning and continued until the light went. She lay in the room at night and listened to the sounds of the city building itself back and thought about what her father had said about patience, about the students who did not yet have the framework, about how understanding takes time and the waiting is part of the work. She wrote to Ava. She wrote every 2 weeks. Ava wrote back. The letters were the particular correspondence of two people who had been through the same thing and had gone in different directions and who maintained the connection because the connection was real, and real connections did not require proximity to persist. Eva wrote about Dorothy's kitchen. She wrote about the farm in spring, the fields greening, the maple trees coming back, the apple tree in the farmyard beginning to blossom. She wrote about Harold plowing and about Robert working the north field and about the children who had accepted her into the household with the same radical practicality they had applied to the puzzle, as though her presence were simply a new arrangement of pieces that had now found their place. She wrote about making pie. She said she had made it on her own for the first time in March. She said the crust had been slightly short. She said Dorothy had looked at it and said the butter had been too warm and shown her the difference. She said she was going to try again next week. Clara wrote back that she should try the crust colder. She wrote that she was teaching again. Temporary position. A school in the Altstadt that had reopened in a building that had been a warehouse before and was a school now, because a school was what the neighborhood needed and a warehouse was what was available. She wrote that the students were 12 and 13 years old and that they were serious in the way of children who have grown up in proximity to difficult things and have developed a directness that their earlier counterparts might have taken years to arrive at. She wrote that she had told them about thankfulness as a direction. She wrote that a girl in the third row had asked what there was to be thankful for. She had said everything that was still here. The girl had said, what if not much is still here? She had said the not much was still here, and that the practice worked best when the material was hardest. The girl had thought about this. She had written it down. Her mother was alive. The Red Cross confirmation came in April 1946, 13 months after the bombing raid. Her mother was in a displaced persons facility outside Hamburg. She had been there since February 1945. She had been listed as missing because the facility's records had been disrupted in the final months of the war. The administrative machinery of catastrophe producing at its end the same chaos it had produced throughout. She was 61 years old. She was alive. Clara went on a Thursday. The facility was a converted schoolhouse 40 minutes outside the city. Her mother was in a room on the second floor with 3 other women, a room that had been a classroom and still had the dimensions of a classroom, the large windows and the high ceiling, and the sense of a space designed for more movement than it was currently accommodating. Her mother was sitting by the window when Clara came in. She was thinner, older. Her hands were on her knees with the stillness of someone who has been sitting in a chair for a long time. But she was there. She was completely and absolutely there, looking at Clara from the chair by the window with the expression of a woman who has been waiting for something for so long that when it arrives, the arrival takes a moment to register, to travel from the eyes to the place where recognition lives and produces its result. Then it registered. Clara crossed the room. She sat on the edge of the chair beside her mother. Her mother took her hands. They said nothing for a long time. There was nothing that needed to be said immediately, and they were both women who understood the difference between silence that needed to be broken and silence that needed to be kept, and this was the second kind. The silence of two people who have been through the same loss and are sitting in the same room, alive, and do not need language for what that means, because language would only reduce it. They sat by the window. Outside, the April light was on the trees, the first green of the Hamburg spring. Tentative and real, and entirely the spring, asking nothing, requiring no frame, simply arriving because the season had arrived and it came with the season the way it always had. After a while, her mother asked where she had been. Clara said, America, Indiana, a camp. Her mother said, was it all right? Clara thought about how to answer this. She thought about the compound and the soap and the mattress and the mess hall and the bus on a November morning and the driveway of the Morrison farm and Harold Morrison's face when the bus arrived. and Dorothy in the kitchen since 4 in the morning, and the table with the white cloth and Thomas's letter and the apple pie with the steam still rising from the cuts. She said yes. She said it was more than all right. Her mother looked at her for a moment. She said she was glad. Then she said she supposed she should make tea. She got up from the chair and went to the small stove in the corner and began to make tea with the practical ease of a woman in her own kitchen. Not because this was her own kitchen, but because a stove and a kettle and the need for tea were sufficient conditions for the ease regardless of where they occurred. Clara watched her. She thought about the Hamburg kitchen, the apple tree, the Sunday Apfelkuchen, the cinnamon smell on October mornings. She thought about Dorothy Morrison's pie on the table with the steam rising from it. She thought about the recipe on the index card in Dorothy's careful handwriting. She thought about what her mother would make of Dorothy Morrison. She thought her mother would make tea with her. She thought they would talk about the recipe. She thought they would find they had the same proportions. She wrote to Eva that afternoon from a bench in the displaced persons facility's small courtyard. She said her mother was alive. She said she had been sitting by the window. She said the April light had been on the trees. She said she wanted Eva to tell Dorothy Morrison. She wrote that she wanted Dorothy to know that she had stood on a Hamburg street in March. At the cleared space where her building had been, and she had done what Thomas's letter had told her to do, had faced toward what she had been given and named it. And that the Morrison farm had been among the things she had named. That the table had been among the things she had named. That the pie with the steam rising from the cuts had been among the things she had named. She wrote that she was teaching again. She wrote that the girl in the third row had written it down. She said she thought that was important. That a 12-year-old girl in a Hamburg school that used to be a warehouse had written down thankfulness as a direction on a Thursday morning in 1946 meant that the thing Thomas Morrison had understood in England in May 1944 had crossed an ocean and a war and a compound fence and a rebuilt street and a schoolroom, and had arrived in the hand of a child who was going to carry it forward. She said this seemed like the right direction for things to travel. She sealed the letter. She looked up at the April sky, wide and gray and clearing at the edges in the way of skies that have decided on better weather and are moving toward it at their own pace, taking their time, carrying the gray until the gray was done. She put Agnes's scarf in her pocket. It was April and she did not need it yet, but she would keep it. She would keep it because it was warm, and because her coat collar still did not close properly, and because it had been given without ceremony by a woman who had not been able to go to the Morrison farm and who had given the next best thing, which was the wool against the cold on the walk through a town where leaves made a sound under feet that a girl from Bavaria had been trying to hear from behind a compound fence. She would keep it because some things were worth keeping, because keeping was a form of the direction, because the direction was available in Hamburg in April in the courtyard of a displaced persons facility, with the tea still warm from her mother's stove and the letter sealed in her hand, and the 12-year-old girl's notebook open on a Thursday in the warehouse school, and Thomas Morrison's sentence in it in a child's handwriting. Thankfulness as a direction, available, always available, even here, especially here. Epilogue. In October 1972, Eva wrote to Clara from Orangeburg, Indiana. She wrote that Dorothy Morrison had died in September at the age of 74. She wrote that the funeral had been at the church where the social gathering had been held in October 1945. She wrote that the Morrison farm was being kept by Robert and his children, now grown, now working the land themselves in the way that working land passes between generations. She wrote that she had made the apple pie for the reception after the funeral. She had made 4 of them, the crimped edges done with the reflex of 27 years of practice, the cinnamon and the apple and the butter in the crust done to the standard Dorothy had required, which was the only standard available. She wrote that Harold Morrison had eaten a slice at the reception table and had looked at it for a moment and then looked at Eva and said it tasted right. He had said it in the plain voice. She wrote that she had told him Clara's story about the Hamburg street in March, about the cleared space where the building had been, about naming the farm among the things given. She wrote that Harold had been quiet for a moment. Then he said Thomas would have been glad to know. Eva wrote that she had cried then. Not before. Then. Clara read the letter at her desk in the Hamburg school, which was no longer a warehouse. She read it in October, with the window open and the smell of the Hamburg autumn coming in. The particular Baltic autumn, cooler than Indiana, with the harbor salt in it. She read it twice. She folded it and held it. She thought about Thomas in England in May 1944. She thought about the direction. She thought about Harold at the reception table. She thought it tasted right. She thought that was exactly what it was. She put the letter in her desk. She picked up the chalk. She went back to teaching.